Hello? So this is a fascist speech. I feel somewhat hesitant about repeating this, but to paraphrase Sun Tzu, if you understand yourself but not your enemy, you'll win half your battles. If you understand your enemy but not yourself, you'll win half your battles. If you understand the enemy and yourself, then you'll win all of the battles. And here in the United States, our introduction, our knowledge about fascism mostly comes from Germany. And it's all wrapped up with our knowledge of the Jewish genocide. But Italy also underwent a fascist movement, and I don't know too much about it. We studied it absolutely in no way whatsoever in our schools. My high school. I didn't even know Italy was fascist for a long time. It was just that they allied with Germany, and that was like the extent of the story I got. Like, why did they ally with Germany in World War II? What were they trying to do? What was the point? Who was in charge of Italy? What had happened to it? I have no knowledge of this whatsoever, except what I've gleaned from reading. And so last time I read one of these speeches, it was by Haile Selassie, standing before the League of Nations and asking for help to avoid his nation being overrun by the Italians. Ethiopia was the only remaining, as far as I know, African state that had resisted colonialism. The Ethiopian highlands had resisted movements from the English and the French, and I think the Dutch, possibly, coming up from South Africa, if I remember my reading correctly. It was a Christian nation long before the proselytizing began by the Europeans. So it has an interesting, complex history. And again, that's a country we don't learn anything whatsoever about in American schools. Then it's invaded by Italy right before World War II. World War II happens. Italy loses, is kicked out of Ethiopia. Ethiopia regains its sovereignty. It was conquered but not colonized. It wasn't taken over for long enough. So it retained its, more or less, as far as I know, its culture and form of government and so on. So in giving speeches like this, in repeating them, in one sense, I'm entering into, what I'm trying to do is enter into the mind of the person giving, entering into the mind, the people he's speaking to, Benito Mussolini here, right? Like he was placed in command of the country, right? He was someone who obviously was able to influence people. And as I mentioned last time, you have to allow, even we look on fascists as bad and evil, especially because of our knowledge of Germany, but we have to be able to say, okay, let you defend yourself. Why did you do this? What happened? What was the road that led to such an event? Okay, so fascism, as I understand it, is basically a political movement which holds the rights and duties of the state above that of the individual. The individual is supposed to sacrifice for the state, for the nation, for the motherland, for the fatherland, and these sorts of things. Dissent is outlawed because that dissent is an attack upon the nation, and an attack upon the nation is an attack upon every one of its citizens. Fascism is very extreme in its movements and its beliefs. And I hope by looking at some of the talks given here that I can sort of understand a little bit of what's going on, okay? So here it is. The following speech, broadcast on October 2nd, 1933, announced the invasion of Ethiopia. Black shirts of revolution, men and women of all Italy, Italians all over the world, beyond the mountains, beyond the seas, listen. A solemn hour is about to strike in the history of the country. 20 million Italians are at this moment gathered in the squares of all Italy. It is the greatest demonstration that human history records. 20 millions, one heart alone, one will alone, one decision. This manifestation signifies that the tie between Italy and fascism is perfect, absolute, unalterable. Only brains softened by puerile illusions, by sheer ignorance, can think differently, because they do not know what exactly is the fascist Italy of 1935. For many months, the wheel of destiny and of the impulse of our calm determination moves toward the goal. In these last hours, the rhythm has increased, and nothing can stop it now. It is not only an army marching towards its goal, but it is 44 million Italians marching in unity behind this army. Because the blackest of injustices is being attempted against them, that of taking from them their place in the sun. When, in 1915, Italy threw in her fate with that of the Allies, how many cries of admiration, how many promises were heard? But after the common victory, which cost Italy 600,000 dead, 400,000 lost, 1 million wounded, when peace was being discussed around the table, only the crumbs of a rich colonial booty were left for us to pick up. For 13 years we have been patient while the circle tightened around us at the hands of those who wish to suffocate us. We have been patient with Ethiopia for 40 years. It is enough now. The League of Nations, instead of recognizing the rights of Italy, dares talks of sanctions. But until there is proof to the contrary, I refuse to believe that the authentic people of France will join in supporting sanctions against Italy. 600,000 dead, whose devotion was so heroic that the enemy commander justly admired them, those fallen would now turn in their graves. And, until there is proof to the contrary, I refuse to believe that the authentic peoples of Britain will want to spill blood and send Europe into a catastrophe for the sake of a barbarian country, unworthy of ranking among civilized nations. Nevertheless, we cannot afford to overlook the possible developments of tomorrow. To economic sanctions, we shall answer with our discipline, our spirit of sacrifice, our obedience. To military sanctions, we shall answer with military measures. To acts of war, we shall answer with acts of war. A people worthy of their past and their name cannot and never will take a different stand. Let me repeat, in the most categorical manner, that the sacred pledge which I make at this moment before all Italians gathered together today is that I shall do everything in my power to prevent a colonial conflict from taking on the aspect and weight of a European war. This conflict may be attractive to certain minds which hope to avenge their disintegrated temples through this new catastrophe. Never, as at this historical hour, have the people of Italy revealed such force of character. And it is against this people to which mankind owes its greatest conquest, this people of heroes, of poets and saints, of navigators, of colonizers, that the world dares threaten sanctions. Italy. Italy, entirely and universally fascist. The Italy of the Black Shirt Revolution, rise to your feet. Let the cry of your determination rise to the skies and reach our soldiers in East Africa. Let it be a comfort to those who are about to fight. Let it be an encouragement to our friends and a warning to our enemies. It is the cry of Italy which goes beyond the mountains and the seas out into the great world. It is the cry of justice and of victory. And until there is proof to the contrary, I refuse to believe that the authentic peoples of Britain will want to spill blood and send Europe into a catastrophe for the sake of a barbarian country unworthy of ranking among civilized nations. Nevertheless, we cannot afford to overlook the possible developments of tomorrow. Okay, little bit out of phrase there. Oi. Okay. So, trying to understand this, we'll go from the beginning out to the end here, okay? So, this bit is interesting, the first paragraph, right? 20 million Italians are at this moment gathered in the squares of all Italy. It is the greatest demonstration that human history records. 20 millions, one heart alone, one will alone, one decision. So the idea of fascism, the ideals of fascism, is to take the people of the nation and forge them into one group. There are no dissenters. There are no problems. Eugenics can come into this, but it doesn't have to necessarily. It's more about ideological strength, right? That you cannot have a dissent. You cannot have a voice going against you. And why is that? Because we are one heart, one will, one decision, and together we can do anything. Right? Today, with the people gathered around, all acting in concert, every single person sacrificing for the state, for the people, for the race, is the greatest demonstration that human history records, right? We aren't just Italy and we're having a go at getting a colonial empire. No, we are Italy unified and powerful. We are Italy where these scattered countries of Europe are not able to stop us, or not able to stand in our way, because we are united as one. Is the idea. So this, of course, is a very strong call. This is why people join groups, because they can remove their own identity and take refuge in another. They can be part of a movement, part of a people. And in this way, they achieve great things, is the idea, right? They aren't their own weak failure of a self. They are assisting every person around them by pushing fascist views, right? The idea is not, we want to take over the country so that we can rule it. No. The idea is to take over the country so that you can help it, right? These people, these ideas that people have about how a nation should be run or how taxes should happen, this is disastrous. This leads to a scattered country which is weak and able to be preyed upon by others. A democracy where people vote, how inefficient is that? We must first decide to run for office, and then people look at people who run for office and they say things all the time. There's a bunch of arguing back and forth, and then finally they vote, and 50% for this one side, 50% for that side. You have another runoff. Finally, someone gets in power, and you have a president who can direct the country, but a Congress and a Senate that are comprised of a more complex group of individuals, and sometimes they stand in the way. I mean, look at here in America, the stories you hear on the news about how Congress is dysfunctional and there's all these problems over having to lose lawsuits, and you have to go before the Supreme Court, and they change their minds sometimes. And say you have an evil that you think is terrible, like abortion, right? There are people who think abortion is terrible, and look, Congress can't fix it. The system we have is not able to recognize good and evil. And so we must break the system. We must overthrow the system. We must help people by getting rid of this evil. And it turns out that we tried first nicely. We tried to act democratically. We tried to put out newspapers and have TV shows and own news organizations and march in the streets and tell people what was right and wrong, but they just don't listen. So now we have to take control. You know, fascism is anti-democratic at its core. It says that the people do not know what they want, but we do, like we, the fascist grouping, do. And why is that? Because we are one, because we do not broke dissent in our ranks, you know, because we follow behind the leader. Like if you don't broke dissent, you end up with a Masonic figure. You end up with this one person. Or you end up falling apart because everyone has their own idea of what the perfection is. So you end up fighting each other. But if you survive as a fascist movement, then you're going to have a power structure. You're going to be military in a way because you embark upon a war. And so what are some of the hallmarks of the fascist movement we see here? That, you know, one heart alone, one will alone, one decision. The decision is made, you cannot go back. You know, you cannot be wrong. Once the decision is made, the Führer or the president for life has decided, or the council, you know, whatever it may be, has decided, and we're going to stick with that, because to dissent against a decision is bad, is to be a bad fascist. It is to be weak. It is to weaken the country. It is to attack the country. And how do you unify people? Well, you unify around an idea, around a person. You say, this is the greatest that has ever happened. You know, we are in a historic moment. You know, the greatest demonstration that human history records, in a historic moment that has never been equaled. And the old ways may have sufficed for old times, but now we are gathered together in order to achieve new groupings and new powers, new levels, and so on. So, you know, she says, the manifestation signifies the tie between Italy and fascism is perfect, absolute, unalterable. You cannot challenge fascism. That is the signal of a fascist movement. You cannot challenge it. And if you don't, and if you try to challenge it, then you are one of two things, right? You are either a traitor or you are an idiot. He says, only brains soft-fired by pure idle illusions, by sheer ignorance, can think differently. Right? And this is something that happens to any extreme movement, that once it harps on an idea, and once a movement accepts that there are rules and things you can talk about and things you can challenge and things you cannot challenge, then it starts to become harder and harder to challenge. And the non-challenging takes over. And you end up with we're going to save the nation, we're going to save the babies, we're going to save religion, we're going to save democracy, we're going to save capitalism, a la the McCarthy era, and you end up being unable to broke dissent. You end up not truly believing in your own ideas, or believing in them so much that you react angrily and intensely to those who challenge you. And this is why fascism is very strong, but then frail. right? Because if you can reveal that the leader is wrong, or if you can make the case so that that everyone can tell that leader is not strong. If you if you're a fascist country and you're a military country, and then you start losing the war, you're in big trouble. If you are a fascist dictatorship and you promise economic growth for your people, but that economic growth does not arrive, then either you fail, or the people have not sacrificed enough. They have not given you enough power, And what do you think the dictator is going to go for? He's not going to say, I was wrong. It's going to go with, the movement's going to go with, we need to go farther and farther. We need to go dig our own hole deeper. We can't give up. Because look at what we achieved. We managed to unify the country, or we managed to defy all of Europe by invading Ethiopia, or we managed to control all of France and destroy her armies in the matter of a few weeks. It says, for many months the wheel of destiny and the impulse of our calm determination moves toward the goal. In these last hours, the rhythm has increased and nothing can stop it now. Okay, again, fascism, the wheel of destiny, because you identify the people with the state. And so the state takes on a angelic figure. The state takes on an identity. You are now, this is the America going west, right? That is the manifest destiny of liberty. That is the manifest destiny of the nation. It's the same with fascist movements in Germany and Italy and any movement which is extreme. You can find it in racial movements as well. You can find it in the Southern secession, right? We're going to achieve greatness. We're going to teach those Northerners what's up. We're going to break their economic hold on us and so on. Whether or not it's real doesn't matter, because the point is to join together. The point is to tell a story which overrides any hesitation, which overrides any disagreement. 44 million Italians marching in unity behind this army. If you aren't with us, then you must be against us. 44 million Italians. Every single person in the nation isn't behind us entirely. This isn't like a democracy where the president comes up and says, I understand we just had an election and there are people who don't believe in me and there are people who have different ideas and there are people in Congress who may argue with some of my movements, but I have been given a mandate by the people to try to attempt these actions, or I think these actions are better, and I hope to work well with those across the aisle. With a fascist movement, there is no across the aisle, because the goal is to say, I am the country. It's to become one. Hitler is Germany. Mussolini is Italy. Mao is China. And so to attack them, Kim Jong-il is North Korea, right? And so to attack them is seen as attacking the nation, seen as attacking yourself, so they have to save you from yourself and so on. You have a dictator who takes on a father-like figure. And like any father, occasionally it involves corporal punishment. But that's his right because he's a father, sort of bit, right? You fall back on these ideas of absolute power. You fall back on Caesar. I must take the reins of the country in order to fix it. I must override dissent in order to strengthen us. I must be in control because the only way we are going to achieve our destiny is by working together. And obviously, we can't have discussions and dissent and democracy and a functioning Senate, because that means we're wasting a bunch of time. That means we have different ideas. That means we have to compromise, and fascism never compromises. Okay, but this bit, although, is I think also interesting, right? Now, when in 1915 Italy threw her fate in with that of the Allies, how many cries of admiration, how many promises were heard? Right? World War I happened. Italy was on the side of the Allies. The Allies win, and what happens? Europe goes into a depression. Europe has economic problems for the next 20 years. Europe is in trouble because you have reparations from Germany, you have a depressed economy there, you have a colonial empire outside of Europe which is growing faster, right? So those countries which have colonies, Spain, Italy, Spain, France, England, and I think the Dutch still had a bit of an colonial empire remaining at this point. I'm not sure exactly, but so Italy is left behind is the idea. Italy feels that it sacrificed and has not gotten what it was promised. Of course, if you're fascist, right? If you're leading a country and you're saying I want to take control of this country, you find ancient issues. You find ancient grievances which the people still remember, and you say, we have been wronged. And so because we have been wronged, we have the permission to do something. This is the old way of dealing with the problem of a just war, right? People do not support a aggressive war, but they'll support a defensive war. But it's not about a defensive war. It's about a just war. It's about having a good reason to go to war. And Italy here is attacking Ethiopia. Right? So he says, we've been patient with Ethiopia for 40 years. It is enough now. The League of Nations, instead of recognizing the rights of Italy, dares talk of sanctions. Right? So again, you are the people. The people have a grand destiny. The nation has a grand destiny. And it is the right of the nation to take its place upon the steps of history. Right? It is the right of the nation to control its proper sphere of influence. Italy has been denied a colonial empire, and now Italy wants a colonial empire. Ethiopia, that barbarian, what does he tell? Barbarian country unworthy of ranking among civilized nations, he calls Ethiopia. A country which has been existent for longer than Italy has been unified by centuries. Jeez. Right? And what happens is, if you are the state, if the people are the state, then what is the positive here? Right? What do you want to achieve? Well, what you want to achieve in this case is economic rising, right? But you have a problem. To focus on the economics of the country, to say we want to make life better for the people, you end up making life better for individuals. And it turns out also that the most effective way to make an economy better is to have some sort of capitalist system in there. Whether it's capitalism with characteristics of so-and-so country, right? Is that you have some sort of capitalism which involves private property, which involves law courts, right? Which involves the rights of a people to resist tyranny, which involves the rights of a people to grow their own businesses, which means that they are working hard for themselves, which means they're going to avoid taxes, which means they're focused on everyday life. But if instead what you focus on for a fascist movement is vanity, you focus on this sense of false pride. You say, we, Italy, have been abused by Europe. We, Italy, are embarrassed. We, Italy, have not held up our level. We, Italy, have not reached our destiny. We of Italy have been lessened because of those people before us who were confused and struggled, and because the other nations have attacked us or abused us or made sure that Italy was split up. Pieces of Italy have been given away. Sicily has been given away to a Holy Roman Empire, a Holy Roman Emperor, or France has designs upon Naples or Corsica. Yeah, Corsica is the island. Okay, and it was their influence and struggles which weakened Italy and made Italy fight against itself. But Italy now is unified and stronger than all those, because you're trying to say, we're not here to improve the life of the daily citizen. We are here to improve the position of the country. And so the regular citizen must sacrifice and sacrifice and sacrifice for the country. And once, the idea, of course, is once the country has achieved its goal, once the country has achieved its destiny, then the people, their sacrifice will be rewarded. Except, of course, if the country achieves its destiny and the people's sacrifice is rewarded and life becomes better in every way and the country is strong and powerful, then what need have they of a leader? What need have they of a fascist movement? Because they've achieved their destiny. They've gotten to the top of the pyramid, right? They are in charge of the world. They are mighty Italy or mighty Germany, or whatever the case may be for the name country. Okay, and what else happens here is he's saying that Italy is unified, but the other countries against us are not. Okay, I refuse to believe that the authentic people of France will join in supporting sanctions against Italy. I refuse to believe that the authentic people of Britain will want to spill blood. Okay, so the other countries are dishonest. The government of Britain is saying this, but the authentic people of Britain do not want it. The government of France says they're going to put sanctions on us and they're going to help the Ethiopians, or they're going to wage war. But the people of France, the real people, don't want to do that. And why is the fascist leader saying this, I think? I think it's because the fascist leader is saying, I have special powers, right? I have special insight. I have special knowledge. Look, I understand the people of Italy. I understand the children and the wives and the husbands who have struggled, and the soldiers and the poor and the wealthy, and all the people. And we now have attacked the weaklings. We now have destroyed dissent. Now it is time to move. And look at Britain and France. They say one thing, but will do another. They will lie, right? They are not as strong as Italy. They are not as bound together in one voice, in one will. It's the idea. Because if you're fascistly trying to control a country, then that country is special, and this moment is special, and the person is special, right? Because how do you put yourself on top? You declare that you are special and unique. You hold on to power. You basically become a king, right? Except that where in the old days the king's legitimacy was based upon either the fact that he had the biggest army, and you become my vassal, I'll protect you, or because the king had the divine right of command. We have the mandate of heaven. We have the word of the Pope that has placed this crown upon my head. We have the oath of every person in the country, in the name of God, save the king. But how do you win? How do you become a king in a democracy? You have to destroy the democracy, right? But democracies are very resistant to being destroyed. So what you do instead is subvert it. You say, elect me, put me in power, and I will solve your problems. I am special. I am different. And so eventually the people elect the fascists. Why? Because the fascists are not scattered. They're not misdirected. They are standing there for years and years and years, and they're saying that, look, all the problems with the country, that's because of these people and all those people over there. You know, the humiliations we've felt recently, that's because the people on charge already don't have the cojones to do anything about it. But we do because we're brave. And how do you know we're brave? We're out here being fascist and holding signs and making speeches about how Italy should be great. Italy should have this as destiny. And look at the milksops that are against us. And they're going here and there, saying maybe this and maybe that. And they stand there and say fascism is bad, but then they allow me to stand up in Parliament and give a speech, and you end up as a fascist, attacking and attacking and attacking and attacking. And because your enemies are scattered, because you can focus on taking down a few links here and there, you begin to gain power. So it seems to me that fascist movements tend to gain power until they end up getting power and then falling apart and then failing. Right? The way to stop a fascist movement rising in a democracy is to hold the line. Is to say, we will not allow this movement to speak. We will not allow this movement to challenge. We will not allow this movement to tell lies. I think that is most important. We will not allow this movement to tell lies, because if you allow your enemies to tell lies, if you don't challenge the lies of your enemies, if you're standing there and the fascists are saying, look, we have a simple answer. We have a simple way of what we should do and how we should do this, and forget what the enemy is saying, right? Forget what the people in charge, forget about these studies and the law. That is getting in the way. How do you know it's getting in the way? Because it's complex. Look, they're trying to trick you. They're trying to lie to you. But we're the fascists, and we have a fascist, very simple message. These people are bad. We are good. This is what you do to fix a nation, and it's a very quick, easy, simple answer. And look at our leader, who is never wrong. Look at our leader, who is so clever and so smart. Look at our leader, who is the person you should elect because he is powerful and he has this movement behind him, and he understands the common people. How do you know he understands the common people? Because you have a bunch of fascists shouting for him, saying, look, go, 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 this idea is great, this person is great. You unify. And from us standing outside looking in, we're going, why should I join with the fascists, right? Well, you're going to join with the fascists either because you think they're going to win, or because you think they have the right ideas. But if you do not believe the fascists are going to win, and if you do not believe the right ideas, then you're not going to join them. And how do you believe that the fascists aren't going to win? You want a people, I think, who are politically engaged. If the fascists are 5% of the country, then 5% of the country is enough to control the country. If that 5% is unified, then the other 95% are disunified. If you think that the fascists coming to power isn't going to change things very much, then you don't really look out for them. You're not scared. But those people who think the fascists coming to power will change things very much are either way against them or way for them. And So if the politics of a country have stagnated, if there's no change or challenge, and you can tell what a political leader is going to say before they even open their mouth, then that is a place where fascism can enter into, because there's a malaise, because there's no challenge, because there's no sense that the world is going to get better. The fascists become, instead of this angry group that is trying to destroy the nation, they become simply another anti-establishment group. They become simply the opposition to the government, simply the opposition to the politics. And in party, in this case, doesn't matter at all. Is there a stalemate? Is nothing happening? Do you feel like Congress and the Senate and the law courts are either confused and ineffectual, or waste all their time in pursuits which do not better the nation, right? It's no accident that fascism rises after World War I. Because there's this economic malaise, there is a confusion in these new countries which have formed, that they don't have enough of a democratic history yet to realize the dangers of fascism, because nobody thinks fascism can actually win. Nobody thinks that fascism, I think, my opinion at least, nobody thinks that fascism is actually going to be as bad as you think. You know, we think if we put Hitler or Mussolini in power, then they make a lot of rhetoric, but no one's actually going to do that. Not in a democracy, not someone we voted for. And even if they do try to do it, what do they get in with? 20% of the vote? 30% of the vote? 50% of the vote? Well, the other 50% of the country won't let it happen. Unless, of course, the other 50% of the country does. Unless fascists, being a small group, a small fanatical group, begin to take control of the police and the law courts, and they put their own people in place, and those people are loyal to the leader of the fascist movement. Those people are filled to the brim with the feeling, with the belief that they are saving the country by being fascist, that they are unifying the people, that it is their job to unify the people, and by becoming part of the fascist movement, you identify with the country. You identify with the leader, right? You are not a peon in the army. You are not a policeman. You are not a judge, protecting the laws of the country and protecting the people. No. You are now Hitler himself. You are the hand of Mussolini. You are the hand of destiny. And so you override your own petty thoughts and beliefs. If you have doubts about all the killing and death and the throwing people in jail bits that you're doing, well, it's for the good of the nation, right? It's for the good of the people. It's for my own good. Because fascism doesn't broke dissent. So even beginning to dissent against them is terrible. So, joining a fascist movement and then finding it extremely difficult to remove yourself. Because that's your group now. And what do? Go out and say, well, I was a Nazi 2 minutes ago, but I've changed my mind. When the entire country is vilifying what you're doing. And when all your friends and your ideas and your movement and your beliefs have been forged in this quasi-religious movement that doesn't broke dissent and believes in destiny and is imagining that by sacrificing you are helping, and you end up with a sunk cost fallacy, right? I've sacrificed so much. I've given so many of my best years to this movement. How could I leave? Well, you can leave if the movement falls apart, right? So fascism that doesn't break up, it doesn't fall apart. What kind of fascism is that? It's going to be one led by a person. It's going to be led by a leader who does not broke dissent. It's going to be led by a messianic figure. And so, again, if we're looking at fascist movements, if you have a far right or far left or whatever movement that says we want to do this, we want to do that, then I think it's a problem, but I don't know if it's dangerous until it gets a figurehead. I don't know if it's really going to lead to a Hitler or Mussolini or Franco even, until there is a person who controls it. If power is dispersed, then power tends to fragment. You know, if you have a council, or if you have a group of three, a la ancient Rome, you have a triumvirate, then eventually the triumvirate is going to go in different directions, which means split up. And I think that in America, at least, in a large democracy, we have this idea that that can't happen. We have this belief that there's no way we could become a fascist dictatorship. But it's happened before in democratic countries. It will happen again. And the most effective way, I think, to combat this is not the strike at the ideals of a fascist movement. It's not to say that, you know, the individual is more important than the country. It's not to say that what the fascists are advocating will lead to economic malaise. It's not to say the fascists are lying. These claims may well be true, but I don't know if they're convincing on the inside, because the movement has replies against them, right? This won't, if you say that the fascist movement's economic choices will bring disaster, well, until they make those economic choices, you don't know that. Right? The fascist movement can stand up there and say that we will do this and this and this, and it will save and save and save the country or the economy. And, you know, the economists may say that's a dumb idea. You may have governors and college professors saying there's no way that works and this is why. But if you are already in the state where you can question the fascist movement, then you are already resistant to the fascist movement. Right? If you already know enough about economics to go, wait a second, that doesn't quite vibe with my understanding of how economics works, you know. They want to put us back in the gold standard, and the gold standard has some clear problems with money supply and whatnot, for example, then you're already primed to go against it. But if you're in the middle, then well, you break up that idea by educating folk. But then again, if you're able to educate them against the fascist movement, you're already breaking up. So education is important, yeah. You know, if the fascist movement is saying that we are for the nation, we are for the destiny of the nation, you know, well, you can refer, at least in America, to other parts of the nation. You can say, you know, you can point at the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the Federalist Papers. You can point at Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech. You can point at Lincoln and say, look, this is America. This is what it means, freedom and individuality. You know, and the cost of freedom and individuality is political disturbances in the country. But again, if you're going to support that idea, if you're going to go back and say Ralph Waldo Emerson is the premier philosopher of the American way, and he says this about A, B, and C, and that is American, and that is what the country means, and that is how we achieve our destiny, by going back to this moment in time, to these ideas. Well, then you're talking with somebody in a fascist movement who already believes in those ideas, who thinks they are important, who's already resistant to the fascist movement. But that is, you can chip away at a fascist outlook. But it's like any cult, I think. To destroy the cult, you can drag people out bit by bit, but to actually disintegrate it, you point out that the leader is wrong. You say the leader has these sins, and we have this information. He has stolen this money. You say, look how you, the people, are sacrificing. Look how much you give up. Look how many people you send to war and death. Look how poor you are. Look at the issues that are happening to you. Look at how hard it is to travel abroad. Look at how much you pay in taxes, and for what? For what? Well, here is a dictator. Here's the person in charge, and he has a mansion, and look at the top judge that the fascists have put in place. Look, he has a wonderful car. He goes around in gold jewelry, and the fascists are going to say, look, those people deserve it. Those people are on top of the world, and they represent the country, and the country should have gold braiding in its clothing. The country should have a palace. Who uses that palace? Who wears the gold braid? One person. And so you, the individual, are sacrificing, but these leaders are not, because that's the flaw of a fascist dictatorship, I think. That anyone can understand. Look how terrible my life is, and look how great their life is. And I'm sacrificing, but I'm not getting anything from my sacrifice, because fascism says you are less important than the country. But fascism, as a movement, as a political existence, must be led by a small group. There are a small group of people who make the decisions. And so the decisions are all their responsibility. They're going to say that I made this decision and it turned out bad because of an enemy. It turned out bad because of the traitors in the government. It turned out bad because of a secret deep state. It turned out bad because the country is not behind me. But it's still the decision of one person, right? If Mussolini stands up and says, we're going to invade Ethiopia because we deserve a colonial empire, and when we do so, Britain and France are not going to do anything, then that is a theory, right? That is a prediction for the future. And if you invade Ethiopia and Britain and France march on Italy, well, the leader is wrong. Of course, the leader isn't going to be overthrown at that moment because the country is now attacked. And so the people naturally draw together and say, we will be one with a country we are under assault. So instead of a military attack, you support Ethiopia militarily, right? You make sure that the fascist country gets into a long, involved war, which weakens it and weakens it, which they spend and spend and spend. Money, time, will. You end up putting sanctions on the country, economic sanctions, so that they cannot get their French wine, they cannot get their British cheese. They can't get. They don't trade with the colonies for oil and gas. You make them do it alone. You say, if Italy, if fascist Italy wants to unify and sacrifice and work towards its destiny, then let it do so. But it will do so with no help whatsoever from the countries of Britain or France or the United States. Let it find its own allies. Let it find its own movements. Because the fascist movement is going to stand up and say, look at how they capitulated. Look at how they are funding a war against us, but they buy all our oil and gas. Look at how afraid the other countries are of us. They don't do anything. They don't stop us. And like any aggressor, like any bully, when they come upon you, when they strike out, you do not give them an inch. Not a centimeter, because that inch or centimeter that you give will end up with the fascist movement saying, look what I achieved. And because the fascist movement is going to, everything is the greatest, everything is the best. Everything is destiny, everything is perfect, everything is Masonic. Masonic? Then you end up fighting a propaganda. And how do you fight a propaganda? You tell the truth. You educate the people. How do you educate the people and fight a propaganda when the people are being controlled by a fascist dictatorship? You do one of two things. You attack the leader, or you chip away at it. You chip away at the country bit by bit by bit. You weaken the fascist movement until it ends up destroying itself in its own internal struggles. As evidenced, I think, by North Korea and Cuba today, as countries I know which follow this path to a great extent. Although with the death of Castro, Cuba is in a slightly more complicated state, I think. But a question still arises in my mind. Italy and Germany were overthrown by war. Franco in Spain, the only reason that Spain is in a dictatorship today is that Franco died. If Franco had lived forever, it would have kept going on, because he's a Masonic figure who controls the army and is seen as the origin of all authority and right. But it wasn't economic sanctions. It wasn't war. It was the death of a leader and a power vacuum happening, which allowed the system to break itself up. In Cuba, this didn't happen. Probably because the people in power were very small and concentrated groups. Cuba is a small island. In North Korea, there was never a power vacuum. The North Korean dictators have successfully passed on to their offspring their powers and crowns, which I think probably deserves more study. Why has North Korea continued to exist as a communist dictatorship? Partially, it's the support of China and Russia. It gets support from outside countries. Partially, it's the economic lockdown and the position they have. North Korea is a small country. You can control who goes in and out. It's a hilly country. It's a country where, even today, news gets in by radio. There are recordings of K-pop and K-dramas that get smuggled in and so on. But again, economic sanctions haven't torn it apart. The internal issues haven't torn it apart. So I'm speaking about, how you deal with dictatorships. How do we, and I'm thinking, how do we deal with Russia? Well, you make it fight a very long, costly war in Ukraine, and you strangle it economically. But again, I think part of the problem with dealing with Russia is that we gave it an inch. We gave it many, many inches. We give it feet even today. We don't cut off all its oil supplies and oil sales. There are fleets of dark Russian tankers going around the planet selling oil at a discount. We've gone back and forth on support for Ukraine and how much support we give it. And so this allows Russia and Putin to claim some victories. And of course, you have Putin, for example, staying in power by saying that NATO attacked us. NATO is moving against us. The West is moving against us, and we need to sacrifice for the country. We need to be one. We need to achieve again our great destiny of the Soviet Union when we ruled half the world. And maybe communism didn't work out, but it's about Russia, really. And I'm the one figure who can solve all this. Look at how strong I am. Look, I can wrestle bears. We see these dangers happening in the United States with people who think, the president can't be wrong. But of course the president can be wrong. You have to question. You have to be able to question the president. You have to be able to question a movement. You have to be able to question whether something is effective or not. Because if you can't, that leads to a fascist dictatorship. And particularly the last bit here. He says, "It is the cry of Italy which goes beyond the mountains and the seas out into the great world. It is the cry of justice and of victory." Victory means an enemy. Victory means you are defeating somebody. Victory means that you are winning, right? So the country has been losing. Stick with me and the country will start winning. And this doesn't have to be a concrete idea. It doesn't have to be, we will improve the economic ideas by this much and this much. And doing that actually is a problem. Instead, you make the most vague claims possible. We're going to win. We're going to be the best. We're going to be awesome. We're going to achieve our destiny, and we're going to achieve justice. We're going to achieve glory. You make things abstract because the more abstract you make it, the less you have to answer for your activities and for your claims. And it's easy, I think, to understand why someone supports fascism. If you look at the country and go, okay, the country hasn't been doing so great, and you look at the country and say, hey, there's a bunch of political troubles. You look at the country and say, oh, look how they are moving against us. You start turning into left or right, and you start believing that the other side, left or right, is evil or bad. And then you start listening to somebody. And the more this person talks, the more sense they make, until you are defending them to your relatives, and you're standing by them, and you're making excuses for mistakes they make or the claims they have, and you're not questioning them. And in fact, it's dangerous to question them now because you have sacrificed so much for this person. Because this person represents the country to you, represents the destiny of the country. And so by supporting them, I support destiny. I become more than myself. I become the Messiah. You know, I become the church. I become the movement. I become the party. And my own weak self, my own problems disappear. Now I can be a red shirt, I can be a black shirt, and that can take over my personality, take over my identity. And if I'm suffering today, if I'm not making a lot of money, if my children are starving, well, something is wrong, must be fixed. And I'm listening to all these smart people say all these smart things and give me numbers and figures, but then someone else argues against them, and it all seems so complicated. I don't understand how all of this works. But look, there's some guy out there who says this is a great idea. This is easy. It's simple. All the intellectuals are trying to stop you. I have a feeling that fascist movements are going to be almost inherently anti-intellectual. If you have a movement that is against intellectualism, that is against education, if you have a movement that says, don't read certain books, don't ask certain questions, don't do certain studies, then that is the step on the road to closing your eyes to a fascist movement which cannot be questioned. The cry of justice and a victory. Well, justice for what? Justice in what way? Whose justice? Everyone, when you hear for justice, they think it's their justice. They put their own spin on it. They have their own view on it. But inevitably, the people who decide justice are those in charge, are those who make the laws, are those who enforce the laws. And if you give up your sense of justice and right to someone else, if you say this person represents me and I need to support my representative in all ways, or else the enemies of the state, the enemies of the country, the enemies of the movement will overwhelm them, then you are on the road to fascism, right? You are on the road to giving up your rights for someone else's benefit. Because you're imagining that you're doing it for yourself, but you sacrifice and sacrifice and sacrifice. And I don't think you ever receive a equitable reward. Because if you are the fascist dictatorship, if you become the most powerful man, if you alone decide what happens, if you're Mao Zedong, or you are Mussolini, or you're Hitler, or you are Saddam Hussein, right? Then who dares question you? Who dares point out when you make a mistake? Because you will make a mistake. I talk about Mao a bit, right? Because there's good Mao, there's bad Mao, right? Mao did some great things. Mao did some really, really dumb things. And did not broker dissent in any way. There's a reason that China rose to its present power once you had a more varied political system. Even though the Communist Party is one party, it is not one person. And that is important. That if you see a movement becoming one person, if you see a movement saying that this one person is incapable of making mistakes, then that is dangerous. That is dangerous beyond anything else, because if you start to believe that someone cannot make a mistake, and you start to excuse their mistakes, and this means that any mistake made by one person, any mistake made by one leader, is magnified 1 billion times by every person who follows them. Even if the leader understands why he's doing things, even the leader has something in mind, the leader is not the mind of the nation. The nation is split between its millions of individuals who make decisions and make choices. So if you have a fascist movement, you're going to try to have a very strong hold on the story. You're going to have a very strong hold on the orders given out. And I mean, the piece of advice I have for fascist movements, as bad as it is do away with corruption, right? Corruption is going to destroy any fascist movement in the end, because it says to individuals, do not sacrifice for the state. Make the state sacrifice for you. So perhaps if we want to attack a fascist movement, we should induce corruption. We should try bribing people. We should attack the system not on ideological grounds, not by chipping away at it, but by instead allowing pieces of it to slow off, allowing the ideals to become softened with, money and greed. Because, look, you've sacrificed so much. Shouldn't you receive some reward? Look, you are the state. You represent the state. And what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Because attacking on ideological grounds can be very weak. If you're preaching to the choir, you can convince people. If you're preaching to a group that is willing to discuss and question, then your rightness or wrongness comes out, right? If I stand up here and I have this idea and that idea, and I claim things about this leader or that leader, then somebody else replies to me and says, no, you're wrong, no, you don't understand. Well, then if I reply, and I say, okay, let me try to understand what's going on here, let me take your point of view into account, then I can't, or I don't think that that leads to a fascist movement. I think a fascist movement happens when I go, you don't know what you're talking about, or you don't understand, or I know more than you, or you say that and it's a lie, or even talking about that means you are attacking the country, means you are a traitor. Then I am saying don't question. And perhaps these are the greater movements. Talk about, fascism, communism, capitalism, democracy, communism, socialism, all this. But perhaps, if I was to think, there are rather two types of organization. Either an organization where questions can be answered and asked, or an organization where questions cannot be asked and are already answered before they are asked. Either it's not curiosity, it's the ability to think I could be wrong. It's the ability to say, I am strong enough to be questioned. It's the ability to say, perhaps I, as an individual, as a person of this country, have an idea which is worth the thought. And I think that my ideas, my concerns are worth listening to. I think that I am an individual and that I am important as an individual. Or you think, I am not important as an individual. I am to represent a movement or an idea or our religion or a point of view, and this point of view is more important than I am. This rule, this law, this fact is more important than I am. Or are we more important than facts? Yeah, perhaps that's it. There's two major types of questioning here. And what's going to happen is either a straight path or a meandering path. I don't know, right? Because a fascist movement can end up with the meandering path. It might, the person leading it can change their mind about what's a good idea or a bad idea, and then end up, shooting themselves in the foot. But then changing course and doing better and doing worse. I guess in the fascist movement, the sins of monarchy are repeated and expanded upon. Of course, it is possible to do the opposite, right? To say that the benefits of monarchy are sinned upon, right? Because it is possible for a people to be too scattered. It is possible for people to not be able to come together as one. But I'm not sure it's possible for people to be forced into that position, right? To be unable to come together as one if they can talk to each other. If we can have a civil discussion, if we can admit that we're wrong about some things and right about others, then that is the beginning of not necessarily government, but the beginning of cooperation, because cooperation is also important. I've been attacking fascism here, and it's important to do so, but also we need to understand that fascism is a method of organization. It is a supra-organization. It is a state that subsumes all its individual parts into itself, and in this way is able to move gallantly, do extreme things. It is able to forge itself into a structure. The problem, of course, is that it forges itself into a very frail structure that cannot handle failure. That if it fails to achieve its ultimate goal, has no goal at all. But it does have a goal in mind. It has a goal of power. So perhaps we can most effectively defeat fascism by being willing to share power. But being willing to share power only with those who are willing to share power with us. I wonder how that works, or would work. Like, how do you keep a fascist movement out of power and discourse, while also being open to sharing power with those who disagree with you? This is the paradox of democracy, right? It's the paradox of free speech. People lie, but if you stop them from lying, you infringe upon the free speech idea. So one of the ways around that is to say in free speech that you can talk about anything, you can question anything except the principle of free speech itself. So perhaps, in a country, if you have a rising rising fascist movement, you can say you can talk about anything. You can talk about, movements and changes in the law and right and wrong. You can talk about anything at all except not being willing to share power. You can say anything or vote for anything or move for anything in a democracy except the demise of democracy itself. You must. I mean, that's how you overcome the paradox, right? You say that there's a paradox within the system, but the very basis of the paradox cannot be. The very basis of the system cannot be questioned, and this fills in the flaw of the paradox itself. That the system fixes its paradox by becoming its own by becoming a paradox. Yeah, that's the idea I've got there. We'll see if I go any farther with it. But so anyway, those are my thoughts on Mussolini justifies his invasion of Ethiopia. And it's easy to understand as a country who is attacked how terrible it is that they are attacking you. The people attacking you, that all they want is your gold or your oil or your people, your wealth. But what about the country who does attack? Right? You say it's for a just reason. You say it's because we are threatened, or you say it's because they attacked us, or because we deserve it. And that's always dangerous. A country does not deserve anything. A country does not have a destiny. A country is a group of people deciding to act in concert. A group of individuals who, though they sacrifice some of their immediate powers for the order of a government, they, by doing so, achieve greater powers. And so that perhaps is the flaw in a fascist dictatorship, in a fascist movement. That that as an individual, as someone who is not on the top, you sacrifice your powers to the fascist movement and receive in return fewer powers. In a functioning democracy, I give up my powers to the government, and I have roads, ports, I have a system for food safety, I have a police force which protects me at night, I have a property which is mine, I have law courts I can go to, I have people I can complain to, I have redress of grievances. I am able to travel the world. I am able to discuss ideas with people beyond my own little village and town. I am able to journey to another part of the planet and say, I am an American. I have America behind me. I have the support of America. I have rights. I can have a gun. I can say things. I have freedom from troops being garrisoned in my house. I have freedom from discrimination. People cannot discriminate against me because of my color. And I cannot discriminate against them because of their color in turn. So that by giving up some power, I gain that power back. By giving up my power to discriminate because I agree to follow a Bill of Rights, I gain the power to not be discriminated against. There is an equal exchange. But in fascism, the opposite happens, right? I give my power to the state, and perhaps I get a safer town. Perhaps I get pride, but I lose redress of grievances. I lose taxes. I lose the ability to decide and vote for whether we need a new theater or a new road. I give up power, and I receive in return less power. I receive accolades and ribbons because the power has been transferred to one person. And if the government cannot do certain things, if the government can't throw me in jail for no reason, then the individual is more important than the government, at least in some ways. But if you hold the government is more important than the individual, then the government may demand any sacrifice it wishes, and the individual can say nothing in return, because the individual is not important. And the problem with any government yet devised on this earth is that decisions are made, the actual practical decisions are made by a small group, and not every single person involved. It's complicated, and there are worries today that we're headed towards fascism again, and I think those worries are well grounded. I think we're going towards a more dangerous world. I think that there are bullies and movements that we have not stood up against. I think there are ideas today in both the right is more loud about it, but the left has it as well, in which dissent is not brokered. A political and social movements which are more religious in fashion than enlightened in method. And I hope we don't return to the days of fascist movements like this, like Italy dealt with once, but we shall see. Perhaps, we do study Germany a lot in the US, but Germany is just one example of a fascist movement. It may do us well to study some of the others and recognize commonalities they have.